Josh,
Brian, I see you're joined by Wally.
I can't see you over there. We have our AI dogs as
My
guests.
AI dog was tired of it. He said, "Dad, it's not comfortable on the lap. I gotta come down. I'm too big for
Yeah,
this."
mine too. How's it going? You got married
Well,
last.
we did get married. It was honestly, I've been telling everyone, it felt like a peak in my life. I was like, man, if this is how it ends today, it's all good. Yeah, easily the greatest day of my life. All my friends were in town, and it's pretty crazy because a lot of my friends live in Western Canada as well. And if anyone knows the size of Canada, it's pretty crazy how far away that means people are. So it was really good to get everyone together. And I think the thing that I was the most happy about is that all my local friends got really along with all my out west friends. So it's just simpatico. So it was pretty sweet.
Nice, nice. And I bet you're gonna beat that peak through talking about AI in recruitment, I bet.
I didn't know how else I could even try to beat that peak without something to do with AI and recruiting. I think that's the way that's going to happen.
Yeah, I know we were just kind of talking off the record before we clicked record, and we were like, oh, we should have been recording. We were talking about how a lot of recruiters are starting to talk to us about how they can prevent or surface when candidates are using AI as a part
Yeah.
of the interview.
Yeah. So I was chatting with a prospect of ours, just around like different use cases, things like that. Obviously, what Quill does, take notes, automate your ATS updates, and create write-ups for you. And he's like, that's phenomenal. I know you're saying that you're like a co-pilot tool. So how else are you thinking of expanding outside of just note taking? Going through some of the ideas and things like that. And he's like, Josh, have you ever thought of trying to use AI to help detect if candidates are using AI to answer questions? I was like, oh, that's a really interesting point because I know we've talked about how people have even used that throughout some of our interview processes where they had like a little chat GPT helper feeding them answers. And so what the prospect here was saying is like, in an example, let's say that you were chatting with somebody and they need to know how to make like a pivot table in Excel or whatever they're using. And so they were asking that question, they got an answer, and then being able to run a search through like an AI search to say, hey, like, what is a pivot table and how would you use it? And then being able to score or see, like, based on the overlapping kind of answer, how likely is it that they used AI to actually give the answer on the spot?
Yeah, like one thing I've been hearing that's kind of different, it's not as AI related, but I think it's really interesting where as we look at the recruiters that are doing a lot of remote work hiring, um, they're constantly worried about are people located where they say that they're located? And there's
Mhm.
actually been some instances that have been on the news where folks in countries like North Korea and things like that are actually getting jobs and being on like getting contracted and getting paid while the company thinks that they're located in the US. So being able to figure out like, is this person located where they are? It's another big challenge that a lot of recruiters are now focused on figuring out, not just in this new AI world, but just in generally the remote world.
How do you increase profitability from like an agency perspective? It's like, how do you create repeat business? Right? Like you're not selling like a software system that's going to continue to renew and things like that. So the only way that you can do it, obviously, is if you create a phenomenal relationship with your client that they want to keep using you. And that's how your flywheel keeps working. And
Right.
so if you're bringing somebody in that gets to be a little sketchy, that obviously just makes a huge impact to that. So if
Yeah.
we can find ways to build that trust, especially early within that process, it's going to make sure that we can keep those relationships around long term.
I think these are all things to differentiate on the business development side over time, right? People think like, oh, like AI is actually going to create a massive negative impact to like the recruiting world. But if you look at it from the perspective of, well, how can we differentiate against someone making hires just internally on their own? Well, it's about using the latest and greatest AI tools because that's all you do to better vet out candidates with these like really sometimes negatively impactful outcomes if you were to hire someone that is committing like identity fraud from a location perspective, things like that. That's going to be something that, hey, like I might as well use a recruiter that's not at my organization to help with this to ensure that
Yeah.
those kind of things don't happen to us.
I think the biggest thing that we need to keep in mind is we do live in a capitalist society, which means the only things that survive are what people are willing to put the money to fund. There's a thousand millions of use cases out there. But at the end of the day, the only things that are going to get built is what customers are going to put their dollars towards building.
Yeah.
And so our customers listening to this are continuing to say, what are problems in my business that I would like solved? That is what businesses can start to see. Could it make sense to even try to use something like AI to solve it? Yeah. It's not going to be the be all end all messiah of the world. It's just going to be, what is something to help increase our efficiency as a business by 20 to 30%, reducing the cost, increasing our efficiency, and our dollars are going to be the ones that actually fund that.
Yeah. I know you were looking at an article that you were kind of telling me about before the...
Yeah. So first off, like we always do, got to give a shout out to Arya for actually producing this article as well. It's just a really interesting find that I had just around maximizing profits for AI recruitment agencies. Just some 2024 stats. Some really interesting trends, and we're even noticing this just from prospecting customer conversations today, that some of the trends that they're noticing is that there are tighter talent pools now more than ever, right? Even saying 61% of staffing agency leaders in our survey of 2023 pointed to talent shortage as the top of their top challenges going into this next year. Even looking at ineffective or inefficient sourcing processes, where 37% of recruiting industry leaders out of their cited survey are noticing that as a primary roadblock, to even things like lack of centralized data or disconnected systems leading to inefficiencies across their processes too.
I just think the lack of centralized systems is exactly what we're focused on solving, right? Like that's probably the biggest thing that we hear, where it's like, hey, like my data's here and then it's here and it doesn't talk to each other. And it's a big challenge to, one, be able to identify candidates really easily and resurface candidates. It's a challenge to just even from a business development perspective, a lot of recruiting firms, as they're focused on business development, they're not just going the typical route anymore of saying, hey, do you have any hiring needs? Hey, I saw this job posting. Are you struggling to fill it? A lot of what recruiting firms are now doing that I'm hearing is marketing candidates, using candidates as a marketing mechanism. So if you can identify, even if you don't have any jobs that you're able to fill, but you have a really strong talent pool with strong data around who those candidates are, you can use that to identify who are the top most valuable candidates that you have interacted with, that you know, and almost go into business development by marketing that person to businesses that you think that they could provide value to, and rate that higher rather than relying on someone to come to you asking, hey, I have this job, I need your help filling. But that all starts with data and good tracking. So I think that one hits close to home for sure.
Well, and I think like the exact point that you're mentioning there, in my eyes, goes right back into the same trends of inefficient sourcing processes and tight talent pools. There's some phenomenal articles, even from some of the ATSs I know we work with pretty closely, have mentioned this. There's just an easy one that I like to reference from a top trend from Bullhorn that they noticed, where they're even finding that 70% of placements are typically made with candidates sourced outside of a firm's database. And of those, 66% of those externally sourced and placed candidates already lived in their database but had to get sourced again. And so if we look back at the trend around inefficient sourcing processes, if we think about the time it takes for a recruiter to go through LinkedIn Recruiter to find somebody, use something like Sourcewell or ZoomInfo to find that credit, put them into some sort of cadence to start reaching out to that person and go, that's days that's going to go by from the time that you found a role you're looking to place, start the search, find the process, and start trying to reach out to them. When most of the time, and again, this is one of the bigger ATSs out there that we've heard confirmed by many other ones that we work with, those candidates already live in your database. We generally talk to those people already.
Not to mention like LinkedIn Recruiter, Sourcewell, ZoomInfo, some of the cheapest softwares on the planet, right? Like they're so inexpensive.
And they're basically giving them away at this point. It's true. One of the biggest missing links that I know you and I have both seen as sales leaders in the past, just based on CRM hygiene, which everyone knows Salesforce and HubSpot tend to be some of the most kept together platforms out there, no matter how powerful they are. If you're not putting good data in there, it's going to limit the quality of those tools. And we're seeing that exact same trend over here on the recruiting front as well.
Well, I think it goes back to something that I like to remind myself a lot when I'm making a decision or we're trying to solve a specific problem, is allowing your time horizon to expand. So when someone's really struggling with something, maybe it's business development, maybe it's sourcing, whatever it may be, it's an immediate problem, and a lot of times they're looking only at immediate solutions. Like,
Mhm.
what can I implement tomorrow that will solve the problem? And a lot of those solutions are out there, but they'll solve the problem by 20% at an extremely high cost.
Mhm.
It won't actually mitigate the entire problem. And then you're tied to that solution forever, needing to pay for that premium expense to continuously solving it in like a short-term way. Whereas if you open up your time horizon and say, hey, this is an immediate problem. So yes, I'm going to implement something that will solve it in the short term, but I don't want to be reliant to that.
Yeah.
And let's say this is LinkedIn Recruiter is a good example of that. I don't want to be reliant to spend $10,000 a year per recruiter on LinkedIn Recruiter for the rest of our recruiting lifespan that we're going to be running this business. Instead, I'm fine spending that this year and next year, but I want to set up systems and a process so that in year 3, I don't even need it.
Even if we didn't want to be as extreme to say, I don't need it in 3 years, what if you could reduce the number of licenses that your firm has to purchase by half? I was talking to somebody yesterday that was mentioning, like, just based on the way that their firm is set up, they're all contracted recruiters into the firm. So they basically pay a desk fee to the agency they work with to help supply them with tools and things like that. So they get like agency discounts that way. They had a nice discount from LinkedIn Recruiter. I won't say what it is, just in case, but it ended up going away, and their cost structure went drastically up because of how that changed as well. You might only need half the licenses you even need to find new candidates because, to your point, you've thought about this not as a 1-year problem, how do I solve this today, but how do we actually scale to reduce our reliance on this, and just had a phenomenal database that we can actually use to increase the efficiency going forward. Because there's so many articles out there as well that say if a recruiter reaches out to a candidate they've spoken to in the past, they're 25% more likely to respond moving forward. How can you work smarter and harder so you start to compound the efficiency of your business as you're going to? Another really interesting trend, and this is one that I'm seeing coming up more and more, is a lot of teams using, and again, like the chat GBT systems, things like that to help with all the write-ups. One of the biggest things that I'm hearing, especially as we're talking to more of our like mid-tier to upmarket clients, is that the process that they're going through as they're actually sourcing candidates, getting them ready for like a meeting or a conversation with a client, is that they might meet originally with like the sourcer, that'll then meet with like a manager, that will then meet with the managing director. They'll then take all 3 of the write-ups and the notes that they've created to put together one profile, or I've heard it also mentioned as a scorecard as well, before they're actually looking to send it off to a client.
Yep.
Now, a lot of times we know the process that a lot of teams are going through today is actually taking that information, all 3 of the different write-ups, and putting it into ChatGPT to actually create that final write-up. What do you see as the biggest risk when we're actually using sensitive client information back inside of just a ChatGPT type system when we're actually looking to create that write-up itself?
You don't want to have to do the same tasks all the time, first and foremost. You don't want to have to do the same manual prompt that you like add in there. You want it to just happen automatically, first and foremost. The second thing is from a security perspective. When you're putting data into any system, you want to make sure that they don't use that data to train their models off of. We've heard clients that have used things like GPT-4, and all of a sudden they find out that people can actually prompt GPT-4 to find and surface that information. You do not want to get into those situations, of course, as a recruiting firm, but even as a company that does their own recruiting. So there's different things that you just want to be cautious around as you're using these AI tools to know, one, do they train off of your data that you're inputting? And then if so, like how? Ideally, it's just a flat out no, they don't.
What are some best practices that you've really seen our customers lean into when they're using AI to create things like job descriptions or cover letters or reformatting resumes or creating profiles based on multiple conversations when they're actually looking to send it out? Like, what are some things that you'd usually recommend to clients that you've talked to?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is like have a plan going into that job rec. So when you're doing the intake, kind of map this out all out of the gate before actually kind of having all these interviews and then being like, oh, okay, now I need to create this, and you're just trying to figure it out as you go. So be more intentional around like what's that end result that you're going to want to get, create an example of that, And maybe you have to scrap together the first example, but then using that end example in mind, be able to feed that into a system like Quill or whatever platform that you're using. And then from there, you can actually have a more sophisticated and full-fledged result that you're looking for. I would say that's the biggest thing our clients are doing, is they're being a lot more intentional out of the gate, rather than being reactionary at the back half, being like, okay, now I need to create this submittal. Let's try to grab this. Let's try to grab this. Let's grab this. And then kind of hodgepodge it together. They're saying, hey, I know I'm going to be doing these 3 steps. So I want to be really intentional about those 3 steps. And from there, I want to already know what my end result is going to look like, so that as I'm going through that process and doing behavioral assessments, doing a screening call, doing reference checks, all of that stuff can be well packaged at the end within one specific document that's easy to read for a client.
Yep, slow down so you can speed up. I think that's a big thing that we've heard not only throughout business, but I know there's a lot of other teams out there, really, really high power teams, that talk about move slow to move fast. And it's a big, big concept to think about. It's obviously one of the easiest ways that as a firm you can really think about how do you automate the process you have in place by doing that heavy lifting up front to make it easy to scale and replicate moving down funnel as well. Because to your point, if you know that this is a template or this perfect example that I want my entire team to use as a format moving forward, because we know this tends to convert at this kind of a rate, how do we make it super simple that as you're not only scaling your team, but showing those best practices, that you can replicate that across the team? Because I think the biggest thing that I'm hearing right now, especially talking to a lot of our clients, is they'll be like, I hear it both ways. Either the managing directors that I work with, the 3 of them all like it formatted differently. So I have to create 3 different types of formats depending on which one I'm sourcing for. Or from the top down saying, each one of my sources on my team send me over this in 3 different ways, and I have to try to reformat it before I send it out to a client. Well, this is a really easy way, to your point, that we can all get on the same page of what good looks like, so we can actually replicate, scale, and reduce our time for all that admin work we're doing to actually help us spend it on those revenue generating activities moving forward too.
Yeah, I think even benchmarking, right? Like if you're doing something all consistent, right? Like everybody's doing the same submittal, then what you're going to be able to see is what is the conversion rate of submitting a candidate to the candidate being accepted for an interview, and why do they not accept certain people? And then you can make that change in a consistent way to incrementally improve the rate that you submit a candidate and it gets accepted. And a lot of people, like barely any recruiting firms, are tracking submission to accepted. A lot of them are tracking like how much call time they're doing, how many calls they're making, things like that. But they're not actually tracking that thing that if they're getting 80% of candidates, and that's, imagine all the work that's done before submitting a candidate, then 80% of them are converting, which seems great. But what if you get 10% more? The extra money that could generate for the firm is massive. So I know we're at time, so we have to go. But it was great chatting with you again, Josh. Congratulations again on the wedding. It was awesome, and we'll chat next time.
Talk soon. See you, Rye.